My name is Elliot, and in late February 2020, my wife and I set off on a road trip from Vancouver to Napa, California, where she was going to run in the Napa Marathon. The trip was going to take us a full 7 days with 6 stops along the way: Astoria, Newport, Eureka, Napa, Medford, and Portland. It would be the most driving I would do in a week, but it was also a new experience to be on the road, hopping from one hotel to the next, seeing small towns, and having the freedom of my vehicle to stop whenever I want. There was nothing like a road trip. The drive down to Astoria was wonderful. It was a beautiful day, and it was a Wednesday, so crossing the border into the States was the fastest I've ever experienced. It isn't usually like that. It's also worth mentioning that this was literally a week before the virus outbreak was escalated to a pandemic and before Trump issued a state of emergency, preventing any non-essential travel across borders. So we were lucky to have gone when we did, because I don't know when my next trip will be, so yeah. I know the route down to Portland pretty well. I mean, it's just one road, and I've traveled there almost annually. It's a good distance away, around 5 hours, which is usually when I start getting really tired of driving. 5 hours is about my limit. When I was planning this trip, I decided not to cut all the way down the I-5, but to take the scenic route down the 101 Oregon coast, something new. It will add another 10 hours or so of driving to the trip, giving me some days with way longer drives, but for me, to visit some new towns was completely worth it. Astoria, Oregon. I've heard a lot about Astoria, but I didn't know what to expect. It turned out to be a bit of an industrial railway port town, famous for being the filming location of The Goonies and Kindergarten Cop. So famous that the hotel we stayed at, the Riverwalk Inn, had many DVD copies of those two movies. In our hotel room, the balcony opened up over the water, so we were literally right beside the marina. During the day, Astoria was beautiful. The Columbus River and the big narrow bridge that almost looked like a rainbow was simply unforgettable. At night, I made my way to Boy Brewing to grab a drink. The way I see a city, the way I remember it, is through their breweries. If your city has a brewery, then in my opinion, it's worth visiting. Boy Brewing reminded me of a lot of other brew pubs in Oregon. Something about wooden aesthetics. I got an oyster dish there, their specialty. They put jam on it for some reason, which I felt defeated the whole point of eating oysters. Oysters should be the star flavor, not the jam. The beer was good though. Newport, Oregon. The next day we set off for Newport. It would be the shortest duration of driving during this whole trip, just over 2.5 hours, so that put me in a good mood. However, it was very foggy and rained at various points. Nevertheless, we arrived in Newport nice and early with plenty of daylight to spare. Newport was the surprise standout of the trip. There was so much to like about it. We stayed at Nye Beach Inn, which, from the rear, there was a big staircase that led down to a wide, windy beach. There's something so unique about beaches in the Pacific Northwest. It's not like tropical beaches. It's much more modest. It's just you, the sand, and the horizon. I'd love to see this place in the summer. Another great thing about Newport and the inn we stayed at was the hot tub. No trip is complete without a dip in a hot tub. We got clam chowder at a place called Chowder Bowl, and the obligatory brewery I visited in Newport was Beer One Brewing. This place had a lot of wacky furniture. For example, the chair I sat on was some sort of modified toilet. That was fun. Eureka, California. Leaving Newport was bittersweet. Deep down, I wanted a relaxing vacation, so I could have definitely spent another day or two there, walking down the beach, soaking in the tub, reading by the fire pit, but the adventure continues. This was a long day, from Newport to Eureka, about a 6.5 hour drive. It was a beautiful route though, passing a lot of great views of the coast on the way down to California. We took a break around the halfway point in a quaint little coastal town called Bandon, where we got fresh crab for lunch. I'll be honest, I'm not a big crab guy, but the crab sandwich I had was pretty awesome. I knew that this was the type of food I was gonna miss when I'm back in Vancouver. As we got further south down the 101, the route continued its windiness, but soon we were off the coast and into the forest of redwood trees. While driving, it was hard to appreciate how big the redwoods were. They were just kind of obstructions. A part of me would have loved to spend a night camping there. I felt as though I've entered another world. By the time we arrived in Eureka at our Best Western hotel, the sun had set on what was a beautiful day. Eureka, in the night, was far from beautiful. We stayed just outside of Old Town, about a 15-minute walk, and when we were heading there for dinner at a place called 511, a higher-end restaurant, I came to the conclusion that Eureka is perhaps the sketchiest city I've ever visited. There was just something about how deserted it was, with the warehouses, wide alleyways, and shadowy streets. Keep in mind, in Vancouver, I live near the downtown east side, a notoriously sketchy part of town, but there, all the craziness is concentrated. Anyways, in the morning, Eureka was much more approachable. It still had its blemishes, but when we got to the harbor and walked through the small historical neighborhood, it felt more welcoming. Our stay at Eureka was short, and I didn't get a chance to visit any breweries there, but during dinner, I did order a beer from Booth Brewing, which apparently originated from South Korea before migrating to Eureka. Napa, California. There is certainly a different vibe when passing from Oregon to California. Once we got closer and closer to Santa Rosa, I really felt it. The small, natural, laid-back vibe that I liked about Oregon was gone, and suddenly I'm on one of the most stressful highways I've ever driven on. This was, of course, after already driving 5 hours. There was a lot of nothingness for a few hours after leaving Eureka. Then we passed a lot of small towns, and then finally, the city. The 5 to 6 lane wide highways, when you only have a faint idea of where you're going, can get a little intense, especially when everybody is driving over 70 miles an hour. Luckily, we made it off the highway safely and arrived in wine country, and it was beautiful. The roads went up and down, occasionally allowing me to see the full view of the vineyards. That was what driving was all about, and it made the whole long journey worth it. Here's the thing about California. Unless you have a lot of time and energy, nothing is walking distance. I love walking. That's my ideal way of seeing a city, but when we arrived in Napa at the Embassy Suite, I realized that the closest restaurant within walking distance was Little Caesars. Not exactly the Michelin star experience I was hoping for. The Embassy Suite was really nice though, and there began our 2-day stay as my wife prepared for the marathon the next morning. Some marathons have the starting and finishing line in the same place, but for the Napa one, a bus actually drives the runner 42.2 kilometers away, and then they have to run all the way back into the city. My wife woke up at 4 a.m. to prepare and catch this bus. Meanwhile, I slept for another 4 hours or so, and then met up with her at the finish line. Every time my wife finishes a marathon, I'm super proud of her because I know how hard it is. It's so incredible that she could do that she has the mental power and physical endurance. So after she finished, we celebrated. We went home and chilled for a bit with a bottle of wine and prepared for our dinner reservation at Morimoto, Napa. We love sushi, and this was an incredible experience. We ordered the omakase and it was phenomenal. The last time we ordered omakase, we were at Tojo's in Vancouver, and that was the ultimate disappointment. Morimoto was great. I recommend it. The next morning, before we headed back on the road in the direction of home, we decided to check out a few different wineries and grab some bottles. I'll be driving for the next 5 hours, so I wasn't gonna do any tasting, but I really wanted to. The first winery we stopped at was Buena Vista. This was a bit of a drive to get to, but the winery itself was historic. I mean, there were literally cutouts of historical figures as we walked towards it. Built in 1857, this was one worth seeing. The next winery we went to was Roche, as recommended by my friend Cody. This winery was a pleasant little storefront in the heart of Sonoma. Lastly, we went to Scribe. We felt it was necessary to visit this one because my wife and I are writers. It was scenic and the weather was perfect. If only we were there for another day and I wasn't driving and I was super rich, I'd love to have spent a day going from one winery to the next buying bottles. Alas, we were back on the road. Medford, Oregon. Out of all the driving I did, This leg was probably the hardest. No matter what type of trip you go on, when you're heading back home, you tend to feel that the commute is more of a drag. A bit of the excitement is gone. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect in Medford, but I did pick a hotel, Inn at the Commons, which was located right next to a brewery, the Common Block Brewing, so that was at least convenient. By the time we arrived, it was already dark and we didn't feel much like wandering around Medford in the night, so we had dinner at the brewery and chilled. We didn't expect much from Medford, but it was an overall nice pit stop. Portland, Oregon. From Medford, we continued back up the I-5 towards Portland. Now, I've been to Portland 5 or 6 times now, and I love the city. We usually stay in or around the Pearl District neighborhood, which is on the west side of the river. But this time, to change things up, I decided to stay on the east side. The east side is certainly the more grungier side. We booked our room at the Jupiter Hotel, which was overall disappointing. First, they charged us like $40 for valet and parking for the night, which was kind of ridiculous. So every time I needed something from my car, I had to go to the valet, get my keys, and go to the garage where it's parked, and then hand back the key to the valet. It's a small hotel, if you can even call it a hotel. Let me park my own car. On top of that, there was a bag of garbage in front of our room when we arrived, which, especially when you've been traveling all day, this is not the type of experience that you want. I didn't feel welcomed, and that was the #1 metric for accommodations. Anyways, one reason I wanted to stay on the east side was because I wanted to go to Cascade Brewing, which has awesome sour beer. And while the hotel was a disappointment, Cascade delivered. It's awesome. Next, we went to Rogue's Pilot Kitchen, and that was a delight. At this point, I would like to add that my wife doesn't drink beer at all, so she was a total sport for coming with me to all these breweries. As a final treat, we got a nice sushi dinner at a place called Bamboo Sushi and then finished off the night in Portland fashion with Voodoo Donuts. Little didn't we know it'll be a long time before we'll have sushi again. Vancouver, Canada. And that's it. That was our road trip. The next day, we headed back to Vancouver, and a few days after that, the whole virus thing exploded. As I'm putting this video together, I feel super grateful that I got a chance to do a few trips this year and that I'm safely at home and healthy. While going on another road trip may seem like something that will happen only months and years from now, I hope I've inspired you to reflect on some of the trips you've been on in the past and feel lucky that we've lived in a time where traveling with ease was possible. Thank you for watching. If this is your first time here, I tend to make videos about writing and the creative process, but I like to make travel videos too. If that interests you, please subscribe and check out these videos here.